We'll dedicate this class. Julie, would you like to make any,
No, I
Any-
just wanted to get that recorded because I didn't have
Yeah.
the earlier stuff on. Class
Okay.
is officially started. We'll ring the
Okay.
bell. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Maura, Allie.
Ellie, I wanted to
Julie,
say hi.
Are you in Yerushalayim, David?
No, I'm back in Chicago.
Oh, we didn't get to
Before-
see you.
Yeah, well, I got as far as the light rail would take me, and I guess you guys are pretty far out.
Yeah, we're
so
not-
I
we
got
don't have
around
light
as
rail
best
yet.
I could, but
Aw,
Jerusalem was wonderful, and I learned for 4 weeks with some younger
amazing.
guys, and it was fun.
Really amazing. Which yeshiva did you learn in?
Mayanot. It's on
fantastic. Yeah.
David Yellen Street. So
Yeah, wonderful. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's
Yes.
great. Okay, Julie, do you want to, is there anything you want to, I mean, there's a
I
lot
just
going
want to,
on.
I mean, what do you say in between? Just we hope to see many of you on Yom Kippur, have an easy fast, all the blessings of a
Yeah,
wonderful new year, all that stuff. I
wonderful,
mean,
sweet new year.
yeah, we'll have a lot of announcements coming next week
Okay.
of
Okay,
upcoming
everybody.
things.
All
'Cause
right.
There's a
we will
lot
get-
going on.
Yeah, there is a lot going on at L'Chaim Center. A lot of very exciting things. I heard Rosh Hashanah was absolutely incredible. And I think Yom Kippur is going to be even more. Wow, that's incredible.
How was
Right.
our lesser?
Great.
It was fun. It was a real fun Shabbos.
Okay, everybody, so we are on
But-
chapter 3. We did some skipping, but we are in 2 Mishnahs. We did one in our last class, which you may not remember, but it's actually coupled with the second Mishnah. So chapter 3, Mishnah 11, and chapter 3, Mishnah 12. So we did 11 last week, but what we're really talking about here, first of all, from whom are we hearing it? We're hearing it from Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. So I think, apropos to kind of what Robin was talking about, Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, we live in a little bit of a cynical culture. I remember there was like a kind of cultural thing not so long ago in America where people said, stop saying, I'll pray for you. Remember that? Like, oh, stop saying I'll pray. Prayer isn't enough. Do something. And in some ways it made sense in the sense of take action, give money, volunteer, do. But it was very dismissive of the incredible action step of prayer. So in fact, prayer is action. And that is a very important Judaic perspective that prayer is action. And nobody prayed more than Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, who was the principal student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai at the end of the Second Temple. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa only has this Mishnah and the Mishnah from last week and the 2 Mishnahs, the Mishnah we'll do today and the one we'll do next time. And that's it. Although he was so central to that stage of Jewish history, it could be that he played a back role because he was primarily in prayer. But what Rabbi Hanina, and there's many, many stories in the Talmud about Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. One of them, just to illustrate who he was, he walked into they were very, very poor. They had nothing. And there are many, many stories of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, his wife, and their poverty and how they reconciled and understood poverty. It's very powerful. But one story that illustrates Rabbi Hanina, he walked into his small, very tiny, modest home, and his daughter was crying. It was before Shabbat, and his daughter was bereft. And she said, I put vinegar in the Shabbos cups to light the candles for the Shabbat. And instead of oil, I mistakenly put vinegar. And it wasn't like today where you just throw it out and you get something new. She was bereft because everything mattered in those days and they were extremely poor. So she was crying and crying, and Rabbi Hanina took her face in his hands and said, my precious daughter, the same God who says oil can burn can also say vinegar can burn. And at that moment, she lit the Shabbat candles and they remained alit with the vinegar. I think in essence, what this is saying is, especially for us, we live in a very cynical culture around prayer, which that's what I brought up at the beginning, which is like, oh, please, you put the two emoji hands together, I'll pray for you. But real, conscious, directed, thoughtful prayer. And this is very, very true on Yom Kippur. Even if you can only sustain it for a minute, this is such a true point about Yom Kippur. It's so vast and so large, and this class is not about Yom Kippur, but the important thing is not to let the vastness and the largeness stop you from even 1 minute of very focused prayer about the oneness of God, that God is everything, that nothing is separate from God, that God is only love, and ultimately what he does is for the good, and you're aligning yourself with God, even if it can only remain for a moment, then that is magnificent. So even if you can only be in sort of very mindful prayer for a minute, make sure you do it. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, more than probably any of the other Tanaim of that stage, teaches us in the incredible power of prayer. So in essence, what he's saying to his daughter is, one area, oil lighting, you call nature, right? You call nature like gravity. We call it nature. Another you call a miracle. But nature is really just a miracle being experienced more frequently. That's a really, really important point about how we experience everything in this world. For example, we see the sun rise and the sunset every day, and we call that nature. We call a woman having a baby more amazing because it happens less frequently, but we still call it nature. We call vinegar burning miraculous and outside of nature because it doesn't happen. But in essence, if you think about any of those things, everything is a miracle. The question is, does God put a specific miracle into our existence with total frequency? The fact that we breathe in, we breathe out, we sustain ourselves through our breath. We call that nature, we call that evolution, we call that biology, because it happens with so much frequency and we don't expect it to be any other way. So what Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa is saying is there is no difference between your breath and vinegar burning. The only difference, or the splitting of the sea, let's say, the only difference is the frequency with which God envelops it in our creation. And really what that's meant to awaken in us is a sense that A, we're not entitled to any of it, and B, it's all miracle. So Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa was about the prayer, the power of prayer. And this Yom Kippur, we should all be pouring our hearts out in prayer for, I did not know this number, but Robin helped us understand that 10,000 people are unaccounted for. We should be pouring our heart in prayer. And we should also be overcome with the understanding that there's no little and big in God time. Little and big are ways we have of understanding the world. This is little, this is big, this is a big miracle, this is a little miracle. But really everything is miraculous, and we never underestimate the power of prayer. And that's what Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, which the story doesn't have anything to do with our Mishnah, but it just shows you just like a little inkling about him. Why are you ascribing validity to oil and impossibility to vinegar? Only because one is frequent. But everything is, in fact, essentially miraculous, and we need to live with that awareness. Another thing, by the way, I want to just say about Yom Kippur, this is not about Yom Kippur, but it can be so overwhelming. So even just taking a minute of very, very thoughtful prayer, or even just taking a minute of praying for the 10,000 unaccounted for in Florida, or taking one little area of your life, and I mean little, something very, very small, so small that you would say, oh, whatever, that's so like almost irrelevant, but changing for the better, that one area, le'olam, meaning forever. So in other words, if we, there's a concept in the Talmud, tefasta meruba, lo tefasta. We've all experienced this. If you try to grab too much, you'll grab nothing. Oh, I never want to speak negatively about anybody again. Well, that'll last as long as your sister-in-law doesn't call you, right? So the tefasta meruba, you want to grab too much change, lo tefasta. You won't grab anything at all. But if you take one tiny point, and I mean really small, and you make a change that you hold on to forever, and you can look back and you can say, on that Yom Kippur, so I'll use the Hebrew date, Tafshin Pei Gimel, in 2022, I made a decision to not do this very small thing, or to do this very small thing, and I stuck with it forever. So my commitment to myself and my suggestion to you is lo tefasta meruba. Don't grab onto too much, but don't do anything at all. Don't do nothing at all. Do something very, very small, even not too hard. Something very, very small, and commit to it, so that you can say that you weren't the same person after this Yom Kippur that you were before this Yom Kippur. And that the truth is, that's not so irrelevant to our Mishnah, this concept of one small thing, because this Mishnah, Rabbi Hanina in the last Mishnah, and in the Mishnah what we're doing today, it's all about when is our wisdom enduring? Like how does it last, and how does it flit away? How does the wisdom that we have about life and ourselves, how does it last, and how does it flit away? Last Mishnah, we talked about that a person who puts, so we have the words in the Mishnah are yirat chet, a person who puts fear of sin. But I think the better, for us, the better way of understanding this, for a person who puts Torah and their relationship to Hashem and his Torah before wisdom, that wisdom will endure. For a person who puts the wisdom before their relationship to Hashem and his Torah, that wisdom will not endure. And what commentators go on to say is that wisdom and knowledge is a handmaiden to desire. Meaning, when you want something to be true, you'll find the wisdom to back it up, and you can believe anything. And people have believed anything in history. And we talked about, last time we talked about how at the Wannsee conference that developed the final solution, I think 10 out of the 13 representatives were PhDs in wildly, high-level PhDs, meaning to say they had vast amounts of knowledge. In fact, my friend, I spent the day with my friend. We went to a conference for Yom Kippur yesterday, and her mother was in Auschwitz. And her mother actually became she spoke at the UN 6 years ago. And she said at the UN, I want you to know that the people who built the camps, they didn't build them hodgepodge. They were the finest architects. They were the finest structural engineers. They were the finest scientists. They were the highest minds. So let you never think that wisdom and knowledge in and of itself is a value. If wisdom and knowledge doesn't come after, or I should say, if a person says there is a God and there is a sense of, and there is a true morality, does this trajectory that I'm going on, is what I'm learning, does it fit into God's world as expressed in the Torah? And if it does, it will endure. A person actually has to go through that, because they can never underestimate. We look at what happened in Nazi Germany and we say, like, it would just never happen. But the truth is, they were very regular people. They were very regular people. In fact, I had a neighbor in Newton, Massachusetts, growing up, who was the author of the book Hitler's Willing Executioners, which was an incredible book. And it was a very large book. And the essence of the book was that these were regular people. They were not evil. And they wound up committing the greatest atrocities because their knowledge took precedence over Yiras Chet. And it sounds so unbelievable to us because we can't even imagine it. But it is very important for us to think, wow, they were regular people. What could make, are there things that I'm putting before? Are there things that I'm pursuing? Is there knowledge that I'm acquiring that goes against God's morality as taught to me in the Torah? Because that won't endure. It might be very very fashionable, and it might be very, whatever, sexy in the times that you live in. But if there is a hierarchy, first comes, there is a God, and his will is expressed in our Torah, and then comes the pursuit of knowledge. And if the pursuit of knowledge is reflective of God's world, that it's enduring, it is truly a tree with blossoms that bear beautiful fruit. But the idea of a tree with beautiful blossoms that don't bear fruit, that's how the sages liken knowledge and wisdom that's not based in the foundation of what's called Yiras Chet. So it's not, it doesn't always seem so relevant, but it is very relevant because every society thinks they're doing the right thing. Nobody thinks they're inherently bad people, and we're not exceptional to that. We have to always measure our values. We should not be arrogant and think that our values today are somehow enlightened and everybody else's aren't. That's very, very arrogant, and it's very naive. And we have to always say there is a God. He gave us the 10 commandments. He gave us a Torah. Is what I'm believing founded and rooted in this sense of morality? And if not, I have to allow myself to be uncomfortable and confront the possibility that this wisdom is non-enduring. This wisdom is non-enduring. And that's Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa's first Mishnah. But he also says something else that seems so obvious. It seems like, really? Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, you were so great. You're one of the most righteous people who ever lived. And you say 3 little things in this Mishnah in the Pirkei Avot, and they don't seem very deep. But like everything, you have to go deeper and deeper. And this is Rabbi Hanina's second Mishnah. Hu haya omer, kol shema asav merubim mechachmato. Anybody whose deeds are greater, whose actions are greater than his wisdom, hachmaso mitkayemet, that wisdom will endure. For anybody who does more and whose deeds are greater and bigger and wider than the wisdom that he's pursuing, that wisdom will endure. But for anybody whose wisdom exceeds his good deeds, ein hachmaso mitkayemet, his wisdom will not endure. So here we have, sort of what seems a little bit obvious, that that the main thing is the deed. And that's really what the Talmud tells us in many different places, earlier in Pirkei Avot and throughout the Torah. The main thing is the deed. In fact, Debbie, you and I were talking about action, right? We were talking about action. And oh, don't worry. Okay, Julia, I hope he feels better. Yeah, make me that's fine. You made me the admin. Okay. That's fine. So on the simplest level, what this is really telling us is it is very, very tempting to learn something and let it sort of percolate in the brain. But the only way it becomes real is if you concretize it in reality. Never learn something. This was, yesterday I went to a conference. I spent the whole day, and it was called Torah Yerushalayim. It was these incredible teachers, and each one was amazing. And I made this terrible mistake. And as I was preparing the Mishnah, I wrote to my friend Judy, I said, we made a huge mistake, which is after each class, we didn't stop and say, what did the teacher say? What's one little thing to take from this? Tafasta meruba lo tafasta, meaning don't grab onto too much. I'll never say a bad thing again, right? But don't fall for the terrible trap of listening to something and saying that was really amazing, that was super interesting, and walk away. Because I'm telling you, we went to this incredible conference yesterday. It was in the Ramada Hotel. It was absolutely incredible. And we really loved it. We were listening, we were taking notes, and then we got in the car and drove home. So this is, and the question is, and it's not too late, I can go back, and I have to go back. But the question is, what did I get from that conference? Did I change? Did I manifest it in my life? Is there something that I did with this knowledge? If so, it's lo kayemet. If not, it's lo kayemet. It's not, it's zelo mitkayemet. It's not going to last. And that is something we fall into all the time. Call it passive learning, or we just forget. Like yesterday, I forgot. I just forgot that if I don't concretize what I learned into action, zelo mitkayemet. Zahachmasha lo mitkayemet. It's wisdom that won't endure. And this is a very Jewish idea. In fact, I remember reading something really beautiful from Rav Dessler. Rav Dessler was, the great rabbi of wartime Jewry in London. And he said that, can you imagine, this is in one, some of you might have, maybe some of you have learned this. It's about Shabbos. So Shabbat. So Rabbi Dessler says, can you imagine a machine, absolutely beautiful, bronzed and shiny, with all these different intricate parts and bells and whistles and this, rotating ramp, and everything works so beautifully, but it produces nothing. So this was in reference to Shabbat. Rabbi Dessler says this is the human week without Shabbat. The idea of time in all of its amazingness, but essentially not having an endpoint purpose for which it was created. The idea of the week without Shabbat is a metaphor, or the metaphor for it, Rabbi Dessler says, is a fabulous machine that works just magnificently and produces nothing. This is kind of personified by Greece, the idea of beauty for its own sake, the contemplative life. It was Aristotle. In fact, a story is told about Aristotle that he was involved in some very illicit pedophilic relationship, something really not good. And someone said to Aristotle, I'm probably getting this a little bit wrong, but this is the basic story. It was said in the name of Bertolt Brecht too, but it said in the name of Aristotle. So someone said to Aristotle, if you're so great, how can you be involved in this relationship with this child? And Aristotle purportedly said, what, just because I teach about a rectangle, I can't be a square? Or something like that. I don't think I got it exactly right, but what? Because I teach it? Like that obligates me? So what Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa is saying is, study only matters if it leads to action, but study really matters. We say that every morning. In fact, there's a blessing that we say, but I think in connected to the Aristotle story, study only matters if your actions are aligned with your study. So it doesn't mean you're perfect, but it does mean you say, I learned this concept. What's one thing I can do to concretize this intellectual understanding into my reality? To align my life just a little bit more. You learn something about tzedakah. You learn something about doing mitzvot. You learn something about the power of prayer. You learn something about gratitude. You learn something, anything at all. In fact, you could even extrapolate it beyond learning. You could say when a person really internalizes that everything that happens in their life is for a reason, that no relationship is superfluous, that no conversation they heard is superfluous. A person could say, okay, we're sitting here on this Zoom call. Robin tells us 10,000 are unaccounted for. I'm meant to hear that. Now there's a part of me that can't absorb it. It's too big. It's too intense. And so I have a very strong internal drive in me to move on. Just to move on from that. But if I heard it, then there's something that I'm meant to do from it. It doesn't mean that you're supposed to do everything about everything, but it does mean to say it's not just learning Torah. It says in Pirkei Avot in chapter 4, Ezehu Chacham, Halomed Mikol Ha'adam. Who is the wise person? The wise person is the one who learns from every person. What that really means is that the human being should ask themselves, okay, I met this person. What am I meant to learn from them? Look, sometimes it could be I'm meant to learn what I'm not supposed to do. And that's also learning. But whether the more you have emunah, the more you have a strong, deep commitment to the fact that nothing happens, it's not for a reason, that every person that you meet is for a reason, that a wise person is one who learns from each person they meet, the more you understand, oh, I have the power to take my behavior up a notch, to take my enlightenment, my awareness up a notch through every conversation, through every interaction. You don't want to drive yourself crazy or be neurotic, but you could walk away from anything you experience and say, what did I learn? I learned something there. What's one thing I can shift, or what's one thing I need to do? What if you speak Lashon Hara? I can learn the signs in my body, the palpable feelings in my body that lead me to speak badly about people. I remember, I'll be honest, in my journey, which I've been very honest with alcohol, that was what I learned to do, is you learn to, like my coach says, something called pull the gum. Pull the gum means slow it down, slow everything down, and start to notice, what am I starting to feel? How am I starting to rationalize? What am I starting to think? What am I telling myself? How am I giving myself permission? You slow the gum means, we act so quickly and reflexively, we rarely think about what we're doing. It seems so like automatic, but slow the gum means slow down and analyze, if you will, what leads me to do something that's not good for me? What happens in my body? How do I start to rationalize? The point is that there is nothing that a person experiences that they can't learn from. They can learn from their own behavior. They can learn from someone else's behavior. I don't mean relegated, but I don't believe that Hanina ben Dosa's words are only about learning Torah. If we enlarge it beyond learning Torah, just to learning from life, think about what he's saying. He also used to say, for a person whose deeds exceed his learning endures. So he's essentially saying, wisdom means learning from everything and everyone. So you have to learn from everything and everyone, but what has to be more, maruba? What has to be quantitatively larger than learning from the amount you learned from everybody? Doing something about it. So one of the basic things to learn here is that really we have a resistance to taking small actions that are reflective of what we've just learned. But the critical thing, I was talking to someone who's been, a client of mine who's been pulling the gum a lot, meaning slowing things down and saying, whoa, what's going on here? And she's journaling a lot. And this is exactly what we want to do. We want to slow things down so that we can learn from them, so that we can change our behavior just a little bit, not a ton, right? Tefasta leruba, lo tefasta, but something. So I just want to tell you that this is not human nature, even though when we're sitting in this Zoom room, it seems like kind of obvious, like, is that really so deep or so obvious? But I'm telling you, I spent the entire day learning from some of the top rabbis and rebbitzins in Jerusalem yesterday. And then I walked away. It's that, I don't know, tempting or it's so easy to forget this. But this is it, it's funny because if you take a word and then you look for it elsewhere in Pirkei Avot, you can learn a lot. So we say, in chapter 4, the word wisdom comes up again in the question, Ezehu Chacham, who really is the wise person? Is it the person with the PhDs? No, they might have a lot of knowledge, but they also can build Auschwitz, meaning to say that knowledge in and of its own right is absolutely meaningless unless it's unless it's premised on absolute values, and only if it's materialized in action. Otherwise, it will not bear fruit. So elsewhere in Pirkei Avot, it says, Ezehu Chacham, who is wise? And it doesn't say the one who, got 2 PhDs from Harvard. It says, Halomed Mikol Ha'adam, the person who understands that every situation that they're in, every conversation they have, every person they meet, there is something to learn. If there weren't, they wouldn't have met them. If there wasn't, they wouldn't have had that conversation. If it was bereft of any potential for learning and growth and forward movement in one's life, then it wouldn't have happened. So that means that everything is available. It would be like, like if we could go through a machine after every experience that we had in life, like, what's one thing I learned? What's one thing I know to do a little bit differently now? You could be in a conversation with someone who talks too much, I talk a lot in this class, who's talking and talking and talking and isn't listening to you. And you could say, okay, I'm learning how important it is to listen. Or I was talking with another friend about, giving advice. Sometimes people are very, very quick with advice. Oh, you really should, right? And most people do not want advice, right? So I'm learning how people want to create their own advice. I'm learning this from the discomfort that I'm feeling in this conversation. And on and on and on. So for a person whose good deeds exceed his wisdom, the wisdom endures. This is everything has to produce something. That's Rav Dessler's metaphor of the machine. And actually, one of the classes that I went to yesterday in my Torah Yerushalayim, my Torah Jerusalem retreat, which was really so amazing, was a rabbi who gave a whole Talmudic understanding, which I didn't totally follow. But the punchline, the nimshal, the point of the whole thing was how important productivity is, but not just business productivity, but the idea of the human being really using their time well. And the thing he said was, so obvious, but the thing he said is literally robbing children of a sense of meaningful productivity and purpose is the phone. It's just depriving people of all their creative potential. But the idea of meaningful productivity, that the possibility of creating something that didn't exist before. I don't just mean a product, but I mean an awareness. I mean a good move within a relationship. I mean holding back on something that's not good for you. I mean pulling the gum and starting to, look at your behavior. I'm not talking about necessarily a product, but that there's a possibility of producing some elevation of what one was before from everything that exists. Now, he goes on to say, but for a person whose wisdom exceeds his good deeds, that wisdom is not going to endure. And that really is the same idea. The same idea, which is, it is a tree that doesn't bear fruit. For you to possess knowledge that isn't reflective to an even greater extent in your behavior, in your actions, in what you do with it, in the mitzvahs, the good deeds that you do with it. So it's funny because he's basically saying the same thing, but he says it in two different ways. And it can't be that it's totally superfluous. For a person whose good deeds exceed his wisdom, that wisdom is going to last. For a person whose wisdom exceeds his good deeds, that wisdom isn't going to last. It doesn't say for a person who has wisdom and no good deeds. You might even have a lot of good deeds, but they actually have to exceed your wisdom. And that really means that you have to learn from everything and make some sort of shift in consciousness, in awareness, in relationship, in speech, something from everything that you learn. I mean, it's hard to imagine this. So I want to actually leave I'm trying to think. There's a lot of other things that I wrote down, but I think that that's the most important point. And I want to leave, the last 12 minutes or so to talking about this, because this is a very unusual idea, but it's really, when we say Chachma, where else does Chachma come in? Wisdom is learning from everything and everyone you experience. And then we have, your deeds have to exceed all that wisdom, which means even more than learning is shifting from one way of being to another, which isn't easy. We can talk about what that means, but let's take comments from people. Susie, yeah, okay, but you're muted. You're muted.
I learned very recently in regards to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur this time of year, and we're hopefully making goals about what we want to accomplish in the year. There's a metaphor that's in the Torah about Jacob and the ladder. And if you use the idea of this ladder, you can only go up one rung at a time, very slowly. If you try to exceed a little, you think, oh, I'm going to do this great big thing, and you skip some steps, then what's going to happen is you're going to fall down. You're not, literally and figuratively, you're going to fall. You're not going to accomplish anything. So as we make our goals for this year, I think it has to do with wisdom and good deeds. We need to take steps that we're able to accomplish something, but it shouldn't be too big that we're going to get overwhelmed by it and not succeed. Just think of the ladder and take one little step at a time. And if you can accomplish that step and stick with it, then it's much greater than if you try to do something big and fall.
Beautiful. So true. I have a question about what Susie said to the group. When Susie talks about taking one step, do you have an intuitive, something you want to do? Do you guys go, do you have when you hear Susie saying just one step, do you feel, I don't even know what that means, or do you feel drawn to something specific in your life? You don't have to share what it is, or you can, but I think it is important that, to Susie's, it's such a beautiful metaphor, but to really contemplate like what that step is in your life. And you know, I just want to put it out there in the form of a question. If people have a sense of, yes, there is something that's small that I can do, that I want to do. Oh, hi, Rhonda. You're muted.
I think it's a beautiful metaphor, and I think it makes sense, and it goes back to what you said about doing something that you can accomplish.
Right.
But I usually look at the big picture, so I have to think about what the small thing is. And I think it's a beautiful way to look at it.
You have to think what the small thing is. I'm a big picture person too. It's so important to go micro and own something. And for some reason, we're resistant to that. We go big and then we don't maintain it. We can't even remember what it is the next day. We have something inside of us that does not go naturally to this obvious point. So what Susie's saying is, well, it's so obvious, but there's something inside of us that resists doing it. So it's really important to get that latter step, to just think about that latter step and to own that latter step. Thank you, Susie. Yeah, hi, Stephen.
I like the idea of stretch goals. I mean, to me, that suggests that you're stretching a little bit, but not too far, so you fall on your face. So it's step by step, but still there's an element of aspiration.
You mean a little out of your comfort zone?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Mhm.
You know, you need to stretch to get to the next point, to get to the next place.
Yeah.
Don't you think
stretch so
that
far to
any,
fall on your face?
don't you think that any growth is a stretch because it's doing something different and you might
Yes.
not be so comfortable with it, even if it's the XY a little bit is so much more, you're able to accomplish so much over the long term than something too big. I agree, it's a stretch, definitely.
Susie, I'm with you. I think changing anything in your script, we all run like scripts, and our relationships run like scripts. Our behaviors are run like scripts. Anything that changes the script is a stretch goal. Anything we make outside of our typical behavior. I think you're right. I mean, I really agree with you, Stephen, about this idea of just a little bit out of the comfort zone. But with my own eyes in my own life and what I see with clients, and anything that takes you outside of your brain circuitry is, your neural circuitry is a stretch.
Well, I think as Susie just said, I mean, anything that you do that you're not accustomed to doing, anything that you're doing maybe for the first time, anything that's different is a little bit of a stretch. It's a little bit of a challenge, but that's a good thing, right?
Definitely.
It's a really good thing.
But it doesn't always feel like a good thing. While you're trying to do it, it may feel uncomfortable because it's not in, as Ellie said, in your circuitry. You got to break out and form a new circuit.
Well, that's how you know. That's how you know when you're doing a good thing, when you feel that discomfort.
Yeah, that's right.
Definitely.
Right. As Tony Robbins said. Tony Robbins said, most people have a super highway to unhappiness and a dirt road to happiness. I've learned how to, what did he say? Like, I've learned how to make my brain in such, to configure it in such a way that I've got a dirt road to unhappiness and a super highway to happiness, meaning all of his behaviors and all of his, he's worked on it so that his natural go-to is this high level of awareness. Hi, Todd.
I'm curious to what people think about the word deeds actually means. I mean, Hanina Ben-Doza was what they called a Hasid. In other words, he wasn't a rabbi in that sense. He was never called rabbi. He was one of the most famous miracle workers that we have.
He was.
So he was criticizing the whole Hasid movement, not the modern Hasidic movement, but the movement back in rabbinic times that were called Hasids. These miracle workers were criticized in the sense that they didn't keep a lot of the laws, or at least they weren't all that careful about it. And they focused on miracles, or at least that's what they emphasized. And when we talk about good deeds, I mean, we could talk about ritual deeds, we could talk about ethical deeds, we could talk about just, actions in general, which seem to be what most people are talking about. How do people really think that the term deed should be understood?
And Todd, I just want to say to your question, it's pretty ambiguous. It does not say kol shemitzvosav merubin mechachmaso, anyone whose mitzvot are greater. And it doesn't say good deeds. In English, it says good deeds, but it uses the word ma'aseh, which means actions.
Yeah, interesting.
It does not say ma'asim tovim. The word for good deeds is ma'asim tovim. This does not say that. It says the real translation is anyone whose actions are greater than his wisdom.
So in response to your question, even without the biblical understanding or background that both of you had, I would have said the same thing. I would say when I think of a deed, I think it was an act.
Yeah, this is not saying anyone whose kind deeds, anyone whose ethical deeds. This is actually saying anyone whose actions are greater, basically anyone who does more than they learn. That's really what it's saying. Anyone who does more than they learn, then what they learn will last. Anyone who learns more than they do. This does not speak well for the ivory tower, by the way. This does not bode well for academia. But anyone whose learning, knowledge, wisdom is greater than what they do. To Todd's point, that's really the literal translation.
Don't you think there's an inference that it's a good deed? That
Yeah, because
it doesn't even
right,
mean a
they
mitzvah, just
translated
a
it.
deed that's good, that has
Well,
a positive result.
Yes, but I'm looking where in another translation. I mean, yes, maybe, but that's not the exact translation.
That's not what it says, right?
Seeing if it's translated differently.
But
Yes,
I
modern
think we're
translation.
talking a lot about the importance of living a productive life. I mean, productivity results from activity, from taking action. So I can go with more of a neutral interpretation.
Do you want a more neutral? Do you find yourself liking the neutral interpretation more?
Well, I think that, I don't know, to me, I think the emphasis is on engagement and productivity. And I think as long as we act, we are engaged and productive. So I think that's enough for me.
Yeah, here in Irving Bunham, he translates it as deeds, actions. So it's not really the good things you do. It speaks to yeah, like, so what did you just say, Stephen? That productivity comes from
No, I think as long as you're engaged, as long as you're productive, I mean, then you're living, then you're alive, right? And that productivity, that productivity and sense of engagement comes from acting, from being an actor in the world.
Yeah, right. And a lot of us struggle with that, like this feeling of being very stuck and not being engaged enough in productivity. I mean, I think that's very hard for a lot of us sometimes. Okay, we have Donna and Linda and Robin. Donna, Linda, and Robin, and then I guess we're done. Okay.
Great. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Donna.
Happy New Year. Can this kind of action or deed be negotiated with someone else, or this is strictly our own, journey? Can it be, if we have something to work on or something we want to do and it involves someone else, can you approach that do it together, like work on it together, or it's strictly something that, you know, I'm accountable to me and I have to work on it and do my part, of course, but I'm wondering about that.
Does anyone have thoughts about
Can I
that?
ask you a
Yeah, Steve.
question? I mean, you're thinking about something in specific. Can you give us an example to help concretize?
Yeah, I guess it's just, well, just in an interpersonal relationship type of thing, you know, I'm a new grandmother and I'm so grateful they brought us in and we're very close. And I just wonder if there's things I need to work on to establish a little bit more boundary or a little more, you know, she's the mom and I have the idea, like different things, like we're very close. And I feel like that might be something in the new year that I would like to address and kind of feel more, I don't know, I guess just more in charge of myself with just negotiating all that. Is
But
that?
I hear
part of
that,
it?
Donna.
Is
I
that
hear
what-
what you're saying, and I think what you just brought up, that if you just focused on your own sense of what role works as a grandmother and what role is experienced like invasively as a grandmother, and you just worked on your own, like basically when to be involved and when not to be,
my
that
piece?
wouldn't be dependent on anybody else's behavior. How they respond is not really in your, it's not really in your control, but your sense of boundary, what you feel they are asking for or not asking for, or the boundaries that are healthy in this dynamic, that's for you to determine, irrespective of their response.
Okay, right.
Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yes, yes. And it absolutely, that's where I'm thinking about making a plan, figuring it out, or just thinking it through a little bit more. Yeah, I mean, it hasn't really come up, but I know that it's part of this connection, going
Yeah.
forward. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll think about that.
Yeah, I don't understand your answer. That,
Mine?
yeah, I mean, you said it's her job to figure it out.
Not that it's her job, but it's not dependent on anybody's response.
Well, see, that's the part I don't understand.
Hmm.
Because I mean, obviously she exists in relationship with her grandchildren and her children, right? And they are going to respond. So, and I would think that as she negotiates this, as she makes some decisions, she's going to make the decision not in a vacuum, but in at least in part in response to their response.
Hmm.
Does anyone have thoughts?
I don't see that. I don't see that it's her. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
what
As a solo endeavor.
yeah, it's
Okay.
not a solo
As
endeavor.
a solo endeavor. Yeah, Linda and Robin, yeah.
Along those lines, I'm just wondering whether or not there is a separation between action and production, and action and results.
Right.
Donna, as you're saying, one can try to take actions in order to achieve a role that you may think is best suited in this new relationship vis-a-vis being a grandmother, being a mother to, mother-in-law to, etc. But we never know how it's going to come out. We don't know how quote unquote productive it's going to be. We don't know the evolution. We can keep trying. We can perhaps, according to Stephen's point, take notice of the results of our actions, and we might be able to recalibrate. But I think it's really high pressure stakes to focus on linking production to our actions. We can try and we can recalibrate, and I don't know how much more we can effectively do.
You're saying link it to the results, you mean? Is that what you're saying? Or to action?
Yeah, I don't think, because
Mhm.
the results are not controllable.
Yeah.
We can observe and we can recalibrate, and we can rethink or recalculate our actions. But again, we can hope for certain results, or maybe we'll be surprised by the results and we have to readjust our own framework.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
no, I appreciate it. I don't mean to monopolize this
Not at
conversation.
all. But
I
with
think
the-
it's a very
Sure.
common, I think
No,
you're expressing
great.
something that's common in any situation. I don't think it's pertains only to a new relationship because of introduction of a new life into the world, and mazel tov to you.
Thank you. You're so right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm
Okay.
learning. It's good. Thank you.
Okay, Robin and Susie, and then I think we're done. Yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing, because I think it's twofold. So not everyone is comfortable with uncertainty and being outside the box. I mean, you know, speaking for myself, I do go outside the box because I had a professor who purposely put us in situations where we would be uncomfortable. So, you know, working with drug addicts and things like that. And that's why I'm comfortable working with my human trafficking women or going to the shelters. So where a lot of my friends, I mean, that's where you can't ever be judgmental about someone because you don't know where anybody is and where they're feeling and where they're comfortable, you know, where their comfortable is, you know, outside the box or being comfortable with being, I have a lot of friends here who aren't productive, but and they see what I do, they think I'm crazy. You know, it's like, but everyone has to be comfortable with what they can do and what their expectations are. I mean, I love Susie. I love that analogy with Jacob's ladder because it's so true. Because then you fall and, you know, it's baby steps. And it's like, you know, I've brought friends to the shelter, you know, maybe, you know, feel it out. I mean, I think a lot is trial and error. And I mean, I'm not a grandmother, but I do have stepchildren. And I know my boundaries, believe me. And it's like, what do you need from me? What would you like? What part of being a grandma or what part do you want me to be? Because you have your mom, you have, you know, other people. And I don't have a problem with asking people, what do you need from me
Mhm,
to
mhm,
make you feel good? Or I like to feel needed. So what can I do to make you feel?
mhm. Yeah, that's a beautiful.
During this
question.
hurricane, my neighbor who is so successful in business, she had such high anxiety for this hurricane. And I think those kind of things bring out so much and it also brings, you know, people together. And the one thing, it was so interesting because it's like we were in constant contact and she stayed at a friend's house. She had COVID and she stayed there and here she's alone and she has COVID. It's like, we're here, we're here. I can't go close to you, but you know, and on the flip side, some of us said, wow, you know, we don't have TV, we don't have phone, we don't have anything, you know, but it's like, that was our time to think and reflect because we had nothing else,
Hmm.
you know, have the TV. And it was
How long, Robin? How long did you not have? anything?
5 days.
Wow.
So, you know, we had our lanterns, we had candles, we had a
Wow.
tank to make, you know, I can make eggs and stuff. And, you know, I had food that was in someone else's freezer, but nevertheless, you know, your house gets really dark and it opens up to, you know, conversation and you can't, you know, these phones are, I see it as a problem as a teacher because my students want to just be on their phones and, you know, like I said before, this opens up a whole different world when you have a hurricane or these kids are cut off from their world, from COVID to hurricane to losing homes. I mean, there's so much loss out there. And I just think our question to ourselves is, where are we most needed?
Mhm,
You know, what can I do for you to make you comfortable in your loss or in your anxiety or
mhm.
to meet people where they are? Because even though I have my home and I am blessed and oh my God, it goes on and on and on and I pray every day. But I'll tell you, it is a different feeling emotionally that I have for myself. Like I've got to get my ducks in a row even more so. And it makes you anxious that way. I mean, I talk to my kids all the time, but it's just the value of life. It's, it's unimaginable. You know, it's hard to even describe. I mean, to me, your purpose in life is to serve others, you know, and to help yourself and your loved ones. And I think right now, I mean, this world is in such turmoil between Ukraine and there's so many, there's so much going on here.
Well,
you
maybe
know?
we can apply Susie's metaphor also to making the world a better place. Like, what's one thing I can do? Like, if I think about the whole thing, but that doesn't exempt me from putting in an effort, you know, and taking
Right.
one step. Yeah, Stephen, and then I actually have to go. Yeah.
Robin,
Yeah.
this, you're in a very, you're in a place with a lot of devastation, a lot of suffering, but you and it looks like your husband have pulled through pretty well. I mean, you're there in your house. I see the lights are on.
But they weren't yesterday. So.
But I'm just, and you said that you said that, you know, all you can do right now is just kind of ask, you know, how can I be of service? How can I help? How can I help others? I'm kind of wondering what happens if you were in the other situation? What happens if your lights didn't come on? What happens if your roof had blown off? What happens if you didn't have your Zoom connection? You know, if you couldn't go back to your home? I mean, how would you be feeling differently now than you are?
I would be in a shelter. I would be, you know, I consider myself a pretty strong person. Okay. And my husband and I, we don't get nervous. We're pretty even when it comes to emergencies. And I'm going to a shelter from here, you know, after Allie's class. And I don't know. My parents raised me. We just take care of others. So yeah, I would be devastated. I mean, we have talked about this numerous times. And yeah, I probably would be thinking, you know, loss is hard on any level. But I would probably be in a shelter. I'd be in a school. I talked to a friend of mine who was we weren't here for Irma, but here she was with her blind mother, 85 years old, and she was in a shelter for special adults with special needs. I mean, to me, someone always has it worse than I do, you know, and thank God, you know, I'm healthy and I'm there to, you know, help others. I mean, I can't say how I would be, but I would hope I would pull it together, you know, because you have to. Sometimes when you have less time to think, it's almost better.
Yeah.
And you just act.
We got to wrap this up. So Susie, yeah.
I just have a very quick thing to say, not with just I guess more of a technicality, but I have a Pirkei Avot that was translated by Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, and I looked up the translation of this particular chapter, and it's exactly the same. No, doesn't talk about more specifically about the deeds. He whose deeds exceed his wisdom shall endure. But he whose wisdom exceeds his deeds, his wisdom will not endure. It's exactly the same. So
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. There's no reference to good.
No, it is action. It's action. And I think Stephen made the point is like action begets action. I mean, just being in momentum and doing when things are so big, just taking that one step. Yeah, Stephen.
I know we have to leave, but there's something I heard the other day on the radio that I think, you know, pertains to what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
There's somebody she's I don't know, some type of scientist who's doing time studies. How do we spend our time? And I think the problem that so many people experience today is that we feel as if there's too much to do. There's too many demands on our time. You know, the kids, the job, the extracurricular activities, everybody's feeling pressured. They don't have enough time. And all they can think about is taking a break, taking a vacation, getting away. But I think what she discovered, I guess from her personal experience as well as from scientific observation, is that after 3 or 4 days of sitting on the beach and reading a book, you start to get antsy and you start to feel also uncomfortable, almost as uncomfortable as when you're overly worked, overly stressed. And the reason for that is because the need that we have to be productive. If you're sitting too long on the beach, you know, you don't feel productive. You don't feel effectual. You don't feel good. So I thought it was interesting.
Human need to be productive and to give. These two incredible. So let's change. Let's do our own Pirkei Avos translation. He who's doing and giving exceeds. So it's like it's the human need to do, to be productive, and to give. To Robin's point, I think those are two very, very deep human needs that need to exceed what we're learning, how much wisdom we have. All right, everybody. Everybody should have a as we say in Israel, Som Kal Umashmuti, an easy and meaningful fast and a beautiful Yom Kippur. If you go to L'chaim, I want to hear all about it. And keep this in mind. Keep in mind this concept of learning from each interaction, from each thing, from taking one step on the ladder, not too much, or you'll sabotage it all, but just a little bit. The metaphor of the ladder, such a powerful metaphor. And take to the original point, one little thing and own it, and let yourself be different from last year to this year. So small. Anything that changes the neural circuitry, the script, is by definition out of the comfort zone. It is a stretch. So just to get the pleasure from seeing that you can change your behavior, you can do something, it's extremely powerful, and why we're here. So wishing all of you to really take the reins on this. And Robin, thank you. We're really
Thank
we're
you.
really with you, and just continue to do your ma'asim tovim, your good acts.
Thank you.
All right, everybody.
All right. Well,
Hi.
good.
Shana Shova.
Amar Fatima Tova.
Hi.
Well, Ally, send my love. Bye, everybody.
Have a wonderful